Thank you. Mr. Jorde.
Yes, will you please state your name?
Cynthia Hansen, Hansen.
And Ms. Hansen, you're sisters with Sherry Webb and a co-owner of the Grandma Frida Budker Hansen's 40 Inc.
Yes, I am.
Okay. And we already have all that testimony in, and you were a part of that testimony, and you would also stand by the answers that you provided in there relative to some of the safety related concerns and health concerns.
I do.
And if we were to go through those all again, would your answers be substantially similar as they were in your written testimony?
Yes.
And do you have any material updates or corrections relative to that the board needs to know about?
We did had some late exhibits that we admitted yesterday.
Okay, so other than that, nothing to add about the testimony itself, the text or the answers?
No.
Very good. I think with that then, given your exhibits are all in evidence, I will tender you for cross-examination.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Mr. Taylor?
Thank you. Ma'am, I'm Wally Taylor. I represent the Sierra Club. So your sister indicated that you and she went to the initial informational meeting. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did any of the health or safety issues you're concerned about come up at that meeting?
I mean, they reiterated how safe the pipeline would be. They likened it to the bubbles in POP, which definitely is CO2, but the concentration was way stronger. I guess that initial meeting, I didn't really, even as a nurse, I didn't really understand or have enough knowledge, background knowledge to ask the questions that I needed. I guess at that initial meeting, we were more concerned about them just putting that line through our ground when we didn't want it.
So give us a little more detail as to your background as a nurse. What kind of work did you do? Or do you do?
I'm retired now, but I did critical care trauma nursing for 32 plus years.
Yeah. Does any of that experience inform your knowledge of the issues regarding this pipeline and the safety issues?
I've never taken care of a patient that was exposed to high concentrations of CO2, but I've taken care of multiple patients with anoxia or lack of oxygen, which can be likened to being exposed to CO2 concentrations that are high. Is an asphyxiant, so it removes the oxygen that's available to breathe, and I have taken care of a number of patients, some successfully and some not. So I feel like I do have that background knowledge there.
Okay. Just to give us some sense of comparison, what kind of situations did you see that caused that patient to have a lack of oxygen?
Excuse me, cardiac arrests, so respiratory arrests where they would stop breathing, their heart would stop. So they were without oxygen, they would have to be resuscitated. And seeing those patients, depending on how long it took to get them breathing and their heart restarted, depended on the success of their outcome or the outcome of. So some of them would recover successfully, some of them would have long-term effects from anoxic brain syndrome, so memory losses similar to a stroke patient with some of their long-term symptoms. I've taken care of overdoses that had come in, trauma patients that had come in from accidents, crush injuries to the chest, where they did not get the amount of oxygen they needed. I'd taken care of attempted suicides by hanging, where they had anoxic brain injuries. So multiple patients
Okay, that gives us a good idea. So since that initial meeting, what have you done to better educate yourself regarding the health impacts or possible health impacts from this pipeline?
Hours and hours and hours of research, going through my medical and nursing books, refreshing my memory on the effects of CO2, research articles online, speaking with physicians and other nurses that I have worked with over the years, attending other meetings, speaking with the fire EMS departments locally. Just a lot of different research.
What did you discuss, or what was the nature of the discussion you had with EMS people?
More about what their knowledge was of these CO2 pipelines, whether they were staffed and equipped to handle something like that, what their training was as basic EMTs, advanced EMTs, paramedics. So what line of progression did they have for staff to handle these kind of emergencies?
Were those EMS departments in Shelby County that you talked to?
Yes.
Okay. What did you determine from those discussions?
So our closest...
Objection, Your Honor.
State the objection.
Yeah, I would be curious, because I may be missing it, what in the pre-filed direct testimony Mr. Taylor is addressing with this line of questions. This just seems to me to be additional direct that is not, tied back in any way to the pre-filed testimony.
Mr. Taylor?
Well, I think that certainly there is comment in the pre-filed testimony, and I can't cite you a page right off the top of my head, but certainly this witness mentioned that, and certainly she has information that is important to expanding on that and explaining that that testimony.
The witness may have information that Mr. Taylor is interested in, but again, there are 576 pages of pre-filed testimony and exhibits, another 153 pages allowed in this morning. Presumably, the affirmative information that the witness thought was important is included in that material, and this is just not the time for eliciting live direct testimony. This is for examining what is already in the direct testimony.
And I think that's what I'm doing.
Sorry, just looking at pre-filed testimony.
Can I give you the exhibit number and page numbers? Is that allowed?
Is that helpful for you?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
So I believe it would be exhibit 615, and I think what you're referring to are the page numbers 76 through 79, maybe.
And that's where it is in the pre-filed testimony. Okay. Well, it sounds like it's in the pre-filed testimony, so if you want to narrow it down or rephrase your question or move on, Mr. Taylor, whatever you think is the best use of your time.
Okay. Did you ever talk with anybody from Summit about your safety concerns?
We attended like a dinner meeting that they had. I did talk to one of their people at that meeting, but our questions weren't answered.
Is that the meeting in Denison that we've heard about?
It's not the safety one, but it was a different. It was in Harlan at the Luritson Center. I don't remember the exact date on that. It was during the spring though, because I remember it was during Lent, and it was a Friday, so I remember that.
Okay. And did they serve fish?
They did have some fish there, but not enough for the number of people that were there.
Did you ever attend any Shelby County Supervisors meetings where you were able to talk with any summit representatives about the safety issues?
I did attend multiple Board of Supervisors meetings. We did speak at some of the meetings, and we addressed our concerns about safety, but we didn't really get any answers back at those meetings.
Yeah.
I guess I will say that when the Board of Supervisors asked questions about plume models and safety risk analysis, Summit's answer back was that information would be provided to EMS once the permits were obtained and once construction was started.
Okay. You mentioned Exhibit 615 that was filed yesterday. Is it fair to say that that has a great deal of information that you think is important for the board regarding safety?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Ms. Kaufman.
I had a question about the, did you have a chance at any of these meetings that you have attended, specifically, were you at the meeting, the PHMSA meeting in Des Moines where the Satarship, EMS responders and survivor spoke? Were you at that meeting?
I was at that meeting. I was the only landowner that was asked to be on a panel to represent all the landowners from the different pipelines.
I was also at that meeting. I don't know if I'm allowed to share that or not, but the gentleman that spoke there, that was a survivor, do you recall that he testified about his ongoing difficulties can you just explain what you heard from those EMS providers and that one survivor?
Objection, Your Honor.
State the objection.
Asked and answered. We've had both an EMS provider from Satarsha testify here live, and by stipulation, we admitted the pre-filed testimony of Mr. Burns, who allegedly was involved in that incident, and those were also among the speakers at the PHMSA meeting.
Thank you. Ms. Kaufman, do you have a reply?
Would you agree that some of the testimony
So, Ms. Kaufman, we didn't rule on the objection, so...
I'm sorry.
Are you just moving on to your question, or did you want to reply to Mr. Dublinsky?
Well, because Cindy has testified about her concerns about EMS preparedness and things, I wanted to just ask her about what she feels about EMS provisions in general, not necessarily those specific. In general, can you talk about
Go ahead.
EMS preparedness? Is that all right?
That's okay. All right. So speaking with the Harlan Fire Department and the Shelby Fire Department, Shelby, the small town of Shelby would be the closest to our land. But according to the fire chief in Harlan, this would be considered a hazmat matter, so the Tri-County hazmat team would be the one to respond if there would be a leak, a major leak or a rupture. Tri-County is Harrison, Shelby, and Crawford County, and if they would not have enough people to handle the situation, then they would be calling the the main office in Des Moines for further instruction. Shelby and Harlan are both volunteer fire departments, and while they're very good at what they do, they are volunteer. They all have other jobs. So response time, according to the Harlan fire chief, would be 15 to 20 minutes out before they would reach our ground. And in a rupture with a major leak or rupture of CO2, if there are people in the area, that's way too long. They would not survive.
Would they be allowed to attempt to go in? Would they try to go in? Do they have the equipment that they would need to go in even, after 15 minutes?
They have limited equipment for their self-contained breathing apparatus. I did not ask about their personal protective gear to get in close to any kind of a rupture. Because of the dry ice conditions, they would need protective gloves, protective shoes. Any exposed skin would have to be covered. They'd need protective goggles because the dry ice crystals could damage the retina. So I'm not exactly sure what they all have for the PPE. And honestly, they could only get so far with their equipment before they would have to walk in because they don't have any electric vehicles to get in there. The combustion engines would not run.
Do you think that people that are living in the, I don't know if they call it the hazard zone or what do they call it? I don't know. Well, we don't really know how far that, we haven't been provided with that information about how far plume would travel. So do you think that we don't know how long victims would have in the case of an event, but if it's 15 minutes, would that be enough time to kill someone?
Oh yeah. The neighbors to the west of our ground, they are on the upside of the hill of our ground, so they might have a little more time depending on the wind, although any kind of a rupture of a plume like that, I think the outspread, we're talking a matter of minutes as close as they are. Downhill, we don't have, because our ground sits on a slope downhill, we don't have any people too close by there, but we do have the hog confinement. So anybody that was working in that building, 2 to 4 minutes maybe for their lives and all the livestock.
It has been testified already that the town of Erling is very, very close to the proposed pipeline, and Summit testified that they didn't consider it to be a high consequence area. Do you think that your community of Shelby or the other surrounding communities, their small rural populations, do you think the lives of those people who live are of less consequence than those in greater population density?
Objection, Your Honor.
State the objection.
Mischaracterizes the evidence. Summit has never suggested that anyone along this pipeline is of low consequence. High consequence area is a legal term of art defined by PHMSA that is not a determination or a judgment. It's made by Summit.
They call it a low consequence area, I believe, or not of a high consequential area. So I understand that we're talking about population densities of greater population are considered to be a high consequential area. Rural residents and small towns then would be considered a low consequential area, to my understanding. Is that your understanding, Cindy?
Am I okay to answer that?
We acknowledge Mr. Dublinski's correction. Those are PHMSA terms. You are welcome. I think you did try to rephrase your question there. Just a reminder that we're trying to stay within the confines of pre-filed testimony and make clarifications of pre-filed testimony, not repeat testimony or bring in new
All right, let me
testimony.
just put it a different way. Do you think your community should be considered a high consequential area?
I think any population, whether rural or community-wise, small urban areas, area life matters.
Thank you, I agree. Do you think that there should be any kind of attempt to put odorants in the CO2 that's going to be piped in the pipelines, or do you think that could possibly help prevent? It is, to my understanding, odorless.
Right. I do think there's research, have heard that there are research going on to develop odorants that would be able to be used in the CO2. I know when Rod Dillon testified recently, he said that it could be considered with the new research, but that at this point he considered odorants to be flammable and that and corrosive, so it could do more damage. I would agree with him that the odorants that are available now from the readings that I have done are corrosive, so it could be an issue. But I do take issue with the flammable part of his statement. The amount of odorant that they would put in compared to the concentration and the amount of CO2 that would be going through that pipeline. CO2 is a suppressant, an asphyxiant. It's going to douse any flame that would come out of that small amount of odorant. So I think odorants would be beneficial if we have to have these pipelines, which I hope we don't.
Given that EMS could be as far, well, if they have to come from Des Moines to Shelby County, that's over an hour if they need hazmat suits. Given that fact, do you think that people who live close to a pipeline should be given like hazmat suits, basically, because they if it happened, they don't have much of a chance, correct?
They don't have much of a chance. I'm not sure. It's odorless, it's colorless, unless you see that initial rupture and see the plume. You're not even going to know quick enough to get into a hazmat suit or into a self-contained breathing apparatus. And that doesn't take into account school buses or people traveling on the roads. Are they going to have to carry those in the school buses? Who's going to get all those little children into these outfits and into self-contained breathing apparatuses? It's just not feasible.
So, since your main concern in this testimony is about safety, and as we've heard from many others to have testified about their biggest concerns are about safety, do you believe this project can be made safe? Is there a way to make it safe for EMS people and for the people who could be affected along the route, traveling or living there?
At this point in time, I do not believe it can be made safe. I don't think we have the technology at this point to do it. Maybe in the future, but by then I think this technology will be outdated.
Are you aware that CO2 in this is often, or not often, but can be used to asphyxiate like diseased animals, large herds of diseased animals? Is that can be used for that?
It used to be the preferred method for recommended by the USDA to euthanize diseased poultry and piglets. I think it's the number 2 or a combined agent now that they use.
But it's still hazardous according to your understanding.
Oh yes, definitely.
So, of course, this wouldn't be purposefully used, but do you think this is more than a possibility that it could happen somewhere along the 2,000-mile pipeline?
Right across the road from us is our neighbor's hog confinement. So if there's a rupture or a major leak, and we have the topography maps that show where his hog confinement, the level his hog confinement sits compared to the top of the hill where the pipeline would run. That CO2 will run straight down into his hog confinement and down into Silver Creek.
And in addition to animals, not only our livestock, but our wildlife being a danger to the animals, it also is the biggest concern to many landowners that have testified, and to yours is the danger to life. Is that correct? To human life?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, if our renter is out in the field working, if he's got his son or his grandkids out on the tractor or in the combine with him, if the employees for the hog confinement are down in that building when there's a rupture, yeah, I don't want that responsibility.
According to the plume modeling released in South Dakota, proceedings showed that the toxic plume, it's not being released here, but there it said from an 8-inch pipe, it could travel 1,855 feet. Do you think there's lots of residences and buildings closer than that to the proposed pipeline?
There is, we have just at this point, well, there's more, but the closest one would be just to the west of our ground for a resident. The family that lives there, I know their grandchildren come to visit them. The initial proposed size of the pipe that was supposed to go through our ground, the initial, we were told 8 inches, and I think the last one we got was 12 inches. So we're looking at a much bigger rupture and more ground covered with that plume if it does leak.
Given the likelihood of death occurring for people that don't have quick access to EMS or able to get away, do you think that there should be bigger setbacks from these pipelines?
I do.
Thank you.
Ms. Coles?
Good afternoon, Ms. Hansen.
Good afternoon.
I have just a few questions. Your sister talked about the concern of Silver Creek waterway pollution. You indicated it might be related to the hog confinement and washout. Also, with the plume modeling, do you have, then today you entered an exhibit, I think you mentioned 615.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Was that, I don't understand that. Was that related to the possible effect of CO2 contamination on the waterway?
Yes, it is.
Can you bring that up on the KMC and explain that? I don't understand what I'm seeing. I think it was some kind of, looked like tubies or something is what I'm referring to.
Okay, that would be in the exhibit, not on the KMC. That would be exhibit 615. I think it's pages 1 through 3.
Thank you. Yes, that was like what I was referring to. I think there's more than that, too. Yeah. Can you take that page by page and let me know what I'm seeing?
So, yeah, if you'll go ahead and...
Yeah, state the objection.
Your Honor, and I know this has been admitted, but just to make a record, this is precisely why we objected earlier, and how we're going to get questions on an exhibit that shouldn't have been admitted, and we have had no opportunity. We don't know what's in here. This is trial by ambush, and we just restate our objection to this being admitted.
Thank you. Did you have a response to that? It's your witness.
Yes.
Ms. Coles, we'll get to you. Just sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Jorde.
So they have the ability to cross-examine. We're all, frankly, seeing it for the first time, and so I probably have some questions on it too. But they're free to cross-examine this witness as to their heart's content on this exhibit.
Ms. Colas, did you have a comment on the objection
I have no
before
problem.
we rule?
I'm very concerned about what she's trying to show here, and I welcome anybody to ask questions.
And again, my concern, Mr. Jorde says he's going to have questions on it. We're welcome to cross-examine to our heart's content. Doing that on the fly is extremely inefficient, and everybody's going to, apparently according to Mr. Jorde, everyone's going to ask questions on this. Again, this is what we were trying to avoid with our objection this morning. I understand it's been ruled on. I just wanted to make a record.
Thank you. We note the objection. Go ahead, Ms. Colas.
Okay, if you can't use the exhibit, can she please explain her position?
Ms. Colas, we ruled that they can use the exhibit. The exhibit's been admitted. Mr. Dublinski's objection has been noted, so it was effectively overruled in this case, but noted. So you can proceed with your question.
What is your concern with CO2 exposure to waterways?
So if you'll scroll, I don't know which way, towards the bottom, keep going. Okay, stop there. So just so you know that this was what I used for the test, and this was an empty, it's a spent cartridge. This is a pressurized CO2 cartridge. It holds 12 grams of compressed CO2.
Just for the record, Ms. Hansen is actually holding a CO2 cartridge, so just making it clear.
And this is the same one that the picture shows on our exhibit. So the pressure in this is 800 psi. So now if you'll scroll back up, this first picture here, we took a sample of our soil from our farm ground and infused some of the compressed CO2 into the soil, put it into these vials, added some distilled water, and then added the pH testing solution. And the blue colored test tubes show the pH of the soil before the CO2 was infused. So we have a pH of around 7.6. And then after we infused the CO2, we repeated the test, and that's the kind of amber colored ones. So you can see that the acidity level is much higher with the CO2 that was infused into the soil. So the damage to the soil is fairly significant, enough to kill microbes, kill plant life, kill earthworms. So definitely damage to the soil. I didn't do these tests soon enough to let them sit long term to see how long it would take for that CO2 to dissipate out of the soil, so I don't have that data. If you'll scroll back farther up, these photos are of Silver Creek. We took water out of Silver Creek, tested the pH, which is the blue colored test tubes. So you can see the pH out of Silver Creek is between 7.2 and 7.6. And then we infused the compressed CO2 into the Silver Creek water and retested the pH. And you can see that it becomes much more acidic with the CO2 into it. So any aquatic life, any plant life along the waterway could be damaged. The water going downstream, although the CO2 will eventually dissipate out of it. And you have to take into consideration this is only 12 grams. This CO2 pipeline is, well, on a 12-inch, if my calculations are right, on a 12-inch pipe, 20 miles long, If there was a rupture, we're looking at 620,104.5 gallons of compressed CO2, or we're looking at 195,612,000 of these cartridges that would be released into the air, that would flow downhill into the soil and into the water. So with that amount of CO2 in the water, we're looking at, and the acidity of the water, we're looking at dissolving heavy metals that are in the waterways and in the soil. So Iowa is known to have lead, arsenic, cadmium, uranium in our soil. So all of those could be leached out of the soil and out of the bedrock, or out of the riverbeds, and into the water to flow downstream. If it's flowing into a drinking water source or into your well, then you've got that contaminated water. So people are either going to be drinking that, or if it's going into a community water system, then you've got extra purification that will have to be done in order to correct that situation.
So an extreme environmental and human problem.
Yes.
Were you referring to acidity, carbonic acid?
Yes.
Thank you. You have attended a lot of things and spent a lot of time. How has this affected your personal life or well-being?
I have no personal life other than this pipeline right now. The last 2 years, the majority of my time is spent researching, talking to people, educating them on the things that I have learned about, on the road driving to and from meetings. Legislative sessions. The last 2 years, I've been down there once or twice a week during each of the sessions to speak with legislators or attend subcommittee meetings, confirmation meetings for Mr. Helland, down there for votes. I mean, I've been at the IUB meetings monthly to speak at those, IUB hearings, just out to Harlan, to all of the board supervisors meetings, to legislative coffees, to speak with our legislators there. I mean, it's just been constant.
So a lot of traveling incurred expenses.
Yes.
Related to this incident.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Sorry. With no further questions from the parties, Mr. Jorde for redirect.
All right. Well, Summit, I guess, waived its chance to ask you all the questions they could have on those exhibits. So can we pull up 615 again, please? Excuse me. All right. Now, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, but I think we might need a few words here for the record. It is the gist of what you're trying to show here is that the lighter color vials are the before or the control, and then the darker.
The darker blue are the controls. So that is the water out of the Silver Creek.
Okay, now, and hold on, we're on page 1 of 615. Okay, go ahead.
And the lighter, kind of tealish, greenish colored, that was after the CO2 was infused into the water and then retested. So you can see that so when you're talking about pH or acidity, the higher the number, the more base or alkalinic the solution is. The lower the number, the more acidic the solution is. So that dark blue is closer to a 7.6, so it's more on the alkaline side. The greenish teal colored is closer probably to 7.8, or excuse me, 7.0 or 6.8, between 6.8 and 7.0. So that is more acidic.
Okay, so let's go to page 2 of 615, please. All right, now, so here, the card with the colors behind the vials is, we're seeing the right-hand side, which is different colors, and it's indicating a different range of the pH, is that right?
Correct.
And then on this page, page 2, is the blue the control, the before?
Yes, and those are the soil samples. So you can see the soil has settled into the bottom of the sample of the vial. So the initial soil sample that we drew added the distilled water so that we could get a reading, and then added the pH testing solution. So the dark blue was the normal soil out of our field, and the ambery color is the one after we infused the CO2 into the soil, added the distilled water, and then the testing solution. So it's much more, the soil became much more acidic with the CO2 infused into it.
So on page 2, you've got kind of a side by side of two different. Are those two different tests? Are the first two on the left the blue, and then kind of the more orange? What is that again? Is there any soil in there?
Yes, there are soils in them.
In all 4.
Yeah, it looks like maybe. I mean, it's like I took multiple pictures trying to get the one, in case one was blurry, and so it looks like maybe those are both like one photo after the other, but they are the same samples.
Okay, all right, very well. And then the numbers on the right-hand side of the colors shown on the right-hand side of the pH card are covered up. Do you know what amount of pH this roughly represents, the yellow or the orange?
This one was.
It looks like at the top right it's 7.478.
Yeah, I think this one was closer to 7.4.
Okay, and so then the conclusion of all this is, in your opinion, then, that if you introduce compressed CO2 into the soil or into water, that it has a direct effect on increasing the acidity of that water or soil.
Correct.
And therefore, you're saying that's bad.
That's bad.
Okay, from a health perspective.
For a health perspective.
Okay.
For a health perspective of humans, for a health perspective of plant life, wildlife. Yeah.
Has Summit at any time, or their agents, provided you, if you know, either verbally or in writing, any documentation relative to what their plan to do, how they plan to discharge the water that's run through the capture equipment, and then what the contents of that water in terms of acidity or other trace chemicals might be?
No.
Okay. Is that something that concerns you?
Yes, it does.
Do you think that without that information, this board should not make a decision on approving this project?
I would agree with that.
You were asked about the hours you've spent. Would you also be in the 1,000 plus range like your sister estimated?
Yes.
Okay. And also, you haven't been compensated for that economic detriment lost to you?
No. Nor for the vehicle that I lost.
Yeah, I understand. You were the second landowner that totaled a vehicle coming to these hearings. Is that
yes.
right? You mentioned the 1,855 foot, which is a non-worst case scenario modeled by the Navigator engineers and experts, and on an 8-inch pipeline. And you're saying that you have concerns that we don't have the corresponding Summit data.
Correct. And ours would be a 12-inch pipeline.
Which you would suspect would have a much larger risk hazard distance.
Yes.
you made the phrase, or you didn't make, you said the phrase, if, quote, we have to have these pipelines, end quote, and then you went on to say something. You understand that this doesn't have to be a foregone conclusion. These could be rejected, or at least eminent domain rejected, so you would have a choice. Do you understand that?
I do. It's been very frustrating, but yes, I do.
Okay. All right. On the low HCA or the HCA, do you understand that HCA is a federally defined term, and it equates to population areas of 50,000 or higher for a high consequence area under federal law?
I do understand that.
All right. But you agree that most areas in Iowa that are near this proposed hazardous pipeline are well under that population, therefore they're not technically a high consequence area.
I understand that. Just like the town of Erling, population is small. If that pipeline ruptures there, that pipeline's right on the east side of their town. That's where their fire department is located. They wouldn't even be able to get to their safety equipment.
Okay. You hesitated on one of the last questions I asked you. I'm about to wrap up, but did you have more to add to that answer? When you said you were frustrated?
I understand that the board will make a choice on whether eminent domain is used. It's been frustrating trying to get support for small farmers through legislation, through our governor, our lieutenant governor. I've spoke with all of them, trying to get meetings. I confronted the governor in the rotunda and asked for a meeting for landowners. She said, contact her office. I've done that more than 6 times, and we've never heard back for a meeting to try and get help with eminent domain legislation. And I know it's up to the board to make that decision, but a lot of times it just feels like the odds are against us.
You feel like the political powers are against you, the landowners?
I do.
All right. Thank you. I don't have anything further.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hansen. Mr. Jorde, your next witness, can we get them up before 12:30?
Well, I don't know if we can finish them, but we can certainly get them up. We would be going to the virtual for this particular witness. It would be Mr. James Fetro, and he should be online. He's what?